So the other day, just on a whim, I threw on Queenbreaker, because that's kind of what I do. Pulling random stuff out of my constantly overflowing vault is what keeps me engaged and entertained. And to be honest, I did forget that Queenbreaker saw a small buff recently. With the release of Lightfall, its blind effect was normalized with arc blind, and shots landed will now chain that blind and some damage to nearby enemies. On top of that though, Queenbreaker did escape the Lightfall linear fusion rifle nerf. Almost all linears saw their damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles reduced by 15%. Sleeper Simulant and Queenbreaker were the exceptions. Do these changes actually make it worth using though? Well, as with all my weapon reviews, I'll collect the data, I'll show you what it's capable of, I'll give you my take on things, and then you can use that thing between your ears to formulate your own opinion. So let's kick things off with a quick overview of the stats and perks. Queenbreaker is an exotic arc linear fusion rifle residing in the heavy weapon slot. It holds 5 rounds in the magazine, but its stat line is variable and related to this weapon's 2 different scope selections. The marksman sight offers more range, more zoom, and more damage, but it doesn't handle as well, has less aim assist, and a longer 633 charge time. The combat sight, on the other hand, is more tuned for closer range engagements. Selecting it will reduce the weapon's damage per shot, but it does max out the aim assist stat and reduces the charge time to a very quick 300 milliseconds. This weapon's intrinsic trait is Wire Rifle. Fires a long-range precision arc bolt that chains to nearby targets and blinds them on hit. And while there is no secondary exotic perk on Queenbreaker, you do have the option of slotting in either Hipfire Grip for increased hipfire accuracy, or Quick Draw for greatly improved weapon swap speed. And at the time of recording this video, there is no exotic catalyst for the weapon. If Bungie holds true to form, they're gonna release one next season, completely destroying the validity of this video. But I mean, that's just a sad reality that I've often had to deal with. With that though, we'll take a look at a few functionality points, and then get into our damage testing. First off, here's your 2 different sights. The Marksman has a little bit heavier zoom and a more precise set of crosshairs, while the combat sight doesn't pull you in quite as much and has a 3-dot triangle reticle when aiming down sights. And I will say, while this is the less accurate of the 2, that big boost to the aim assist stat is very noticeable. For the blind chaining, the status effect is applied to your primary target as soon as a shot lands, and almost instantaneously, the lightning chain occurs, blinding and damaging nearby enemies. In my controlled test environment, enemies were taking 10,992 points of damage at base. And this is unaffected by proximity since we're dealing with chain lightning damage and not blast damage. Keep in mind though, this isn't Jolt. It's not going to continually reproc with additional damage from other sources. For the blind itself though, it is now consistent with our other arc blind effects. So PvE enemies will be rendered non-combative for 8 seconds. For Queenbreaker's reload speed, while the scope selection doesn't affect the animation itself, I always run my test off time to reload, then fire, so this will cause a discrepancy. Both are relatively quick though, 2.15 seconds with the combat sight and 2.5 seconds with the marksman sight. For the ammo reserves, you can carry up to 21 total rounds at base, 22 with a single arc reserves mod, and 24 if you have 2 equipped. A 3rd copy provides no additional benefit. With that, time to run some damage numbers, but a friendly reminder first.
PvE damage numbers are variable and will change depending on content scaling or enemy tier. I've been doing all of my recent testing in the Spire the Watcher dungeon at the Aklos encounter, so that I can keep the results consistent and comparable from video to video.
Starting out with the marksman sight. Versus Aklos, Queenbreaker will hit for 53,120 points of damage on a crit. So with the 5-round magazine, that puts our maximum single mag damage at 265,600. The time to empty I have clocked at 5.28 seconds for a single mag damage per second of 50,303. Looking at the combat sight now, a crit registers 38,364, with a max single mag damage just over 190k. So in this respect, the marksman sight damage is 38% better. The combat sight does have a much quicker time to empty though, at just 3.6 seconds, so the single mag damage per second is about 3,000 points better, sitting at 53,283. For me personally in PvE, I take the higher total damage over the marginally better damage per second. If for whatever reason you do like the combat sight more though, I mean, do your thing. And I did test 2 other linears for points of comparison. First, the special weapon linear fusion rifle, Lawrence Driver. Note that this is base damage with no Lagrangian sight buff, just because it's not extremely reliable in a single target damage scenario. But the single shot damage is 35,187, maximum single mag damage 211,122, that is with 6 shots not 5 though. And the single mag damage per second comes in at 38,247. Now, damage per shot in total for the single mag are pretty comparable to Queenbreaker's combat sight, but it certainly can't get that damage out quite as fast. I also tested Storm Chaser. Now this does fire a 3-round burst, but same weapon class, same elemental affinity, same weapon slot, and honestly I was just kind of curious to see how it was weighing in currently. If all rounds in a single burst do land as crits, that's 63,537 points of damage, so 317,685 in its base 5-round magazine. Both are a good bit higher than Queenbreaker even with its higher damage marksman sight selected. But even with its slightly faster charge time, the damage per second is a bit lower because it does take time for that 3-round burst to release. Keep in mind though, these numbers are with just a boss spec applied. Storm Chaser can roll Vorpal, Storm Chaser can roll Frenzy, it can roll Firing Line. Any of those perks with the respective 10, 15, or 20% damage increase would allow the single mag damage per second to surpass Queenbreaker's. In terms of overall performance though, how's Queenbreaker holding up? I feel like this is one of those weapons whose mileage is going to vary depending on how you engage with the game's content. I enjoy playing solo. Oftentimes I prefer to play solo. If you fall into that category as well, I think there's value here. Now the damage is okay. Not top tier by any means, but in a lot of situations, it's good enough. It does deal with healthier major targets and champions pretty efficiently, meanwhile chaining that blinding effect and a good chunk of damage to nearby enemies. So if you want to tackle the big boy target in the room first, you'll leave the trash ads bumbling around and bewildered. And with multiple shots, you'll probably just down them outright, saving you a little bit of trouble. I found it's also nice if you're getting a bit overwhelmed in an encounter. One quick shot at the enemy or group of enemies that's giving you grief, and you'll have plenty of time to reposition, find some cover, and get your wits about you. And unlike if you were using a disorienting grenade launcher, you don't have to worry about gauging distance, an odd bounce off something in the play space, or causing self-damage. Plus, that blind effect does carry the ability to deal with unstoppable champions. So with Queenbreaker, you're always one quick shot away from securing the stun. And with this being a linear fusion rifle, the ammo reserves aren't too bad. So you can use this weapon a bit more liberally through the mid encounters of an activity. And on top of all that, for the handful of you that are still playing Gambit, I think this is a pretty solid weapon for that activity. With the steady flow of heavy ammo crates, you can spend a few shots on crowd control and clearing an area. It'll put at least respectable damage on the Primeval while keeping any leftover ads in the area pacified. And it's decent for the PvP aspects of Gambit. Not brokenly overtuned like it was in the past, but those shots fired do still feel pretty grabby. The biggest thing holding this weapon back though is gonna be its single target damage. Now you could definitely do worse, but at the same time, you could absolutely do better. If you're looking to post damage numbers that make your fire team members hang their heads in shame, this ain't it. Queenbreaker definitely feels like more of a utility focused weapon. And in certain situations, that utility is great to have. But you're giving up both your heavy slot and your exotic selection for it. And that can be a tough sell for a weapon that isn't exactly bursting at the seams with damage potential. Plus, if you're bringing it along simply for its ability to deal with unstoppable champions, that means you're passing up on Leviathan's Breath, which fills the same role, and with its insanely high damage per shot, it just kinda does it better. And the heavy slot in general is just a tough place for an off-meta weapon to get any traction, especially in a fireteam-based setting where damage is paramount. In my world, I'd tone down the stats into damage a little bit and convert it to a special weapon. I'm sure that's way easier said than done, but I definitely think that would get more players using it more often. As it sits currently though, for me and how I play Destiny 2, I like what it brings to the table. Now, you're not going to see any Queenbreaker, new DPS meta videos popping up on YouTube, but it is a useful gun that's been earning its keep in every activity that I've tried it out in. On to PvP though. And I'm gonna level with you, I've really been having a tough time caring about this side of the game, which is a shame because I used to love it. But I'll always put Queenbreaker through its paces so you have the information. Looking at the marksman sight first, you're going to be dealing 620 points of damage on a crit, and we'll see 181 points of damage to the body. For the optimal time to kill, including the charge time, you're looking at about 0.64 seconds with 1 crit. The body shot time to kill is 1.8 seconds with 2 shots landed. If you're wondering why that doesn't quite seem to line up with the weapon's charge time, there does seem to be about a half-second delay between the release of the shot and the initial charge up of the following shot. With the combat sight now, crits are registering 448 points of damage, and you're going to see 131 on a body shot. Optimal time to kill here, 0.3 seconds with a single crit. Body shot time to kill, 1.1 second with 2 shots landed. For the damage from the Chain Lightning, we're looking at a static 126 points of damage dealt in PvP. And as we talked about in the PvE section, this is not going to diminish based on proximity. The maximum reach of this Chain Lightning does stretch out to a pretty friendly 8 meters. And it also does create the blind effect, which you can see here from Mrs. Ironworker's perspective. And I did test things out versus both a Cloak Spectral Blade Super and a Well of Radiance. Now, regardless of which site you're using, combat or marksman, one crit packs enough punch to put the enemy player down in both cases. If looking at body shots though, versus the Spectral Blade, you will need to land 3 shots to put the roaming super down, and that is consistent across both scopes. Versus a Well of Radiance, just land your crit. Neither the combat site or the marksman site can deal damage quickly enough with body shots alone to work their way through the damage resistance and healing of the well. So there you go. If you do want to give Queenbreaker a shot in the Crucible, you're at least armed with the information. I do highly recommend my solo players out there giving it a go in PvE. I was personally surprised by its effectiveness, and I think it is worth taking it for a spin around the block. Worst case scenario, you find out the weapon's not for you, you stuff it back in the vault, and carry on. But that's gonna do it for this one though. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to leave it a like, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you're not already to catch any of my upcoming Destiny 2 content. With all that being said though, you guys are awesome, and I will catch you on the next one.